Hello everyone and welcome to October's Global Mapper webinar. My name is David McKittrick and with me today is Josie McKnight.
Hi David and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning.
The topic for today's webinar, as you're probably all aware, is what's new in Global Mapper. We've been waiting for this one for a while. Global Mapper has actually been released for quite a few weeks now. I know a lot of you have downloaded it already and we've had a lot of very favorable comments from folks that we have shown it to, so we thought we'd use the opportunity in our monthly webinar to share some of the information or some of the, the highlights of Global Mapper. If you haven't already upgraded or tried Global Mapper, you will have the opportunity to download it and you can request a trial license. So all of the features and functions that we show you today, all of the new tools that we introduce you to, you can certainly try those out. So Global Mapper 16 is the topic for today. As we have done in previous What's New sessions, I do recommend you take a look at some of the documentation we've put together. During the installation of the application, you're prompted with a window that shows you the new features. You can scroll through that window and see all of the new functionality that we've added. You can also browse into your program files and actually find the document itself. I believe this time there's about 11 pages of new functions that are going to be added. For today, we're going to cover the highlights. Obviously, we don't have time to go into every new feature and function, but I would suggest if you're considering upgrading to 16 or if you already have done so, it's a good idea to read through that document to get an idea as to some of the tools you have available. And again, today Josie and I are going to cover some of the highlights. The first thing we're going to show you is a new tool for visualizing your data, essentially, graphing and charting. I'm going to show you a couple of scenarios that allow you to create a graphic representation of data, two different data types we're going to be working with. Josie's going to be looking at some of the 3D viewer enhancements, some of the new visualization tools we have in our 3D viewer, and that is a work in progress. We're going to be enhancing that going forward. We'll show you some of the things we've added with the release of 16. A very exciting new visualization tool as well is fly-through recording. A lot of fun to play with. When we were at our conference in Germany, we had a lot of fun generating fly-throughs and sharing those with some of the users. So very, very interesting data sharing mechanism, the ability to record a fly-through and save that in a video file. And we'll show you how that's done. It's a very, very simple procedure. We have some new data sources we'll share with you. That's a moving target in Global Mapper. We continually add new formats, new online data sources, and I think we've got a couple that we want to draw your attention to. We're going to transition towards the end of our session today to focus specifically on the LiDAR module. I know many of you are not using LiDAR currently, but if it's something you do envisage using in the future, you may want to take a look at some of the tools we've added specifically in that module. The LiDAR module is really taking on a lot of strength in terms of functionality. We've introduced things like automatic building and tree detection within a point cloud. Feature extraction has been added, and we're going to show you some of those. If you do not have the LiDAR module currently, we're also going to suggest you maybe activate a trial. You can try it out just like you can with the software. So again, the second half, or the last part, I guess, of today's session is going to focus specifically on the LiDAR module. Again, improved ground classification is one functional improvement. Automatic building and tree extraction is another. There's other things in there as well, and time dependent, we'll show you some of those new functions that have been added. And of course, much more in there as well. So a lot to cover in the next hour or so, or 50 minutes at this stage. So I'm going to begin by introducing you to that first bullet, which is a new graphing tool in Global Mapper. Right here in the analysis menu, right at the bottom, you'll see our graph and chart manager. This is a new item, a new function. And I'm going to, as I said before, I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios. I've got a couple of workspaces already configured here. The first one I'm going to bring up is simply a DEM, an elevation layer. I'll zoom in a little closer so we can get an idea of the terrain. Now, this is just by way of a reference layer to show you the graphing functionality. Obviously, in this case, it's a raster layer, and the raster layer that is representing elevation. Each of the cells in here has a Z value or a Z value. What we're going to do with our graphing tool is actually show you a histogram of this layer. So let's go ahead and go through that process again from the analysis menu, graph and chart manager, and brings up the Graph and Chart Manager window. And obviously, if I had graphs already prepared, I would have these listed here. I'm starting from scratch, so the only button available to me is New. And you'll see now the dialog that lets us create these graphs or these charts. First thing I'm going to do is give it a title. I'm going to keep it simple here by typing in DEM. Let's keep it uppercase. So DEM is the title. You'll notice that's previewed on the window on the right-hand side. The data series allows me to choose the type of graph. Now, because I'm working with a raster elevation layer in this case, I'm going to be fairly limited in the choices I can make. For instance, if I try to create a pie chart, it's going to tell me I'm not able to do that with this data. We're going to come back and visit this tool in another scenario in just a second. The specific graph type I'm going to work with in this case is a histogram. And this is going to actually populate almost immediately. And when I select that with the source layer name, it shows me, and I'll just drag this a little wider so we can see a little more clearly, a histogram that illustrates the distribution of elevation within the cells in this layer. And there are various options in terms of how this is displayed or configured. I can change the color. Choose my color. Let's choose a red color. It'll make it a little easier on the eye. I can choose the number of bins. Now, given my screen resolution, I may not want to increase it too much, but I could define this as any value I want. I can choose what to display as a label on each of these bars, whether it be attribute and value, or value and attribute, or simply attribute by itself or value. I'll just choose value in this case, and you can see the actual value, actual total, within the bins that are described. Now, you'll see the bins down below, -1 to 12, 12 to 25, etc., essentially spaced out elevation values, and you can see the distribution of my elevation within this layer. So that's just one example of a graph. Now, I'm not going to go any further with this one, but if I wanted to, I could save this and essentially apply this to the map, maybe as a visual tool. I'm going to cancel this one and create a graph that's perhaps a little more meaningful and certainly more easy to see the actual results of this. I'm going to unload that data. I'm going to load up another workspace here. We're trying to keep things as streamlined as possible by preparing workspaces ahead of time. This one is the state of Texas. What I wanted to graph in this case is some oil production data that I have. Now, the data currently is not associated with the features on the map. These, by the way, are the counties in Texas. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is a joining process. Many of you who have sat through some of our webinars before may actually have seen this procedure before. But I don't have that data in place currently. So again, first thing I'm going to do is run through that joining process. Very simply, choose the data to join. I'm not going to take the time to explain all of the steps here, but it's a fairly simple procedure. I'm doing a one-to-one match in this case, and the end result of that procedure is I now have another value. So that's basically an attribute join. This is the value that I'm most interested in. I want to create a graph that illustrates the distribution of oil production within the state of Texas. Now, in order for me to do this, in order for me to tie this in visually to what I'm seeing on the screen, I'm going to create some color patterns on here. And I'm going to do this based on the Railroad Commission regions. And again, we've done this before in other scenarios, but I'm basically going to create a very simple thematic map based on those region values. And in Global Mapper, I can initialize from values to automatically populate. I just choose a solid color as a starting point. And you'll see that when I'm finished, it will populate. Oh, I'm sorry, that was not a value. Let me try that one more time, and I'll make them actual values. We'll delete those and go through the procedure one more time. I should read the dialog boxes, I guess. And again, we'll choose red as our starting color. And these are not numeric values. That tool, by the way, is another thing that's a fairly new feature, the ability to differentiate based on numeric values. In this case, they're not numeric values. So I'm going to apply a random color basically as you see right here. The regions will be reflected in the colors that you see on my screen. Now I can change each of these if necessary. This is just a random selection of colors. If I click OK, my map will reflect those colors. So you can see at this stage there may be some colors I might want to change. Too many purples perhaps on there, a couple of different yellows. I do have the ability to do that. Now again, going back to the graphing tool, what I wanted to generate in this case is a pie chart. And the pie chart is going to reflect the oil production within each region in this case. So again, I'm going to go to the analysis tool. I'm going to choose my graph and chart manager. And again, we're going to create a new graph. This time I'll call it oil production. Excuse me for my slow typing. And this time, when we go to our data series, we'll choose pie chart as the type of graph. The value attribute that we want to reference is our oil production. Now, I have to warn you, the initial setting, the initial default appearance of this is going to be kind of strange because it's going to develop a pie chart based on every feature in the layer, which is really not that meaningful, not that useful, but just to warn you, it looks kind of strange. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change how it's distributed based on region. And you'll see now I have a pie chart that actually references each region and tells me, based on the color code, what the oil production values are. Now, the reason I took the time to assign the colors, I don't have a lot of screen real estate to move windows around, but you'll see the colors of the map in behind. The pie chart itself has its own random color selection, but I can actually match the colors to the colors I chose on the screen. And again, you can see why maybe some different color selections would have been a good idea had we time to do that. But the colors you see reflected here reflect the colors on the map. I've tied the two together. So I was able to generate a map, or generate a pie chart that reflects the total value, the total oil production in this case, within each defined region and matches that color for color. So that's just one other example of being able to graphically represent your data. Now, when I click OK at this stage, it gives me a preview of that graph. And I have the option to save that as a bitmap and to display it right on my map. So in terms of a presentation tool, in terms of being able to visually represent this data, this provides a very, very, very powerful function. I'm going to go ahead and we'll just go ahead and do that. We'll call our file oil, and it will prompt me to place it right on the map. I'm going to go with a fixed width view of about 30%, and it's going to be on the right side of my map, probably about half an inch from the edge, and we'll make it right at the center. And we'll just go ahead and click OK on that, and you'll see when I close a couple of these windows, we now have our oil production. Again, probably a little more care and attention in terms of the size, but you can see now if I printed this, I exported this, I generated a PDF. I now have a tie-in between the colors on my map and the colors in that graph. So the graphing tool, those were just two examples of the functionality we have now in Global Mapper 16 to visualize data, to graphically represent data, and to show, in this case, distribution of oil based on my regions. Josie.
Okay, thanks, David. We're going to look at the 3D viewer now. So we've enhanced some of the functionality. We're going to go back to this elevation that David showed us earlier, and I am going to just zoom in and turn on the 3D viewer. So one thing we've added is a skybox. We've got a couple different options in here. Right now it looks like we've got a tropical sunny day. This is brand new with version 16, and we have the drop down here. We can go back to the same situation as version 15 with no skybox, or we can choose from a few different options. We've got a full moon here and sunsets. Just adds a little bit of color to the skybox. I think at the last conference we were at, we got a lot of oohs and ahs over this one. Yeah, so another thing I want to show is that we now have a height notification for in this box. So I'm just going to use the exaggeration here, and we see we're notified what the vertical exaggeration is. Before you'd go into the properties, if you ever wanted to check. So right now vertical exaggeration's 2, and that's what was showing on the screen. If you want to update this or turn it off, the options right down here, turn off display notifications, or you could have them stay on longer. So here we go. Let's see what else. So that applies for water level as well, and walk mode, I believe. So you can see that the height in walk mode.
Yeah, and if you use your scroll wheel, the walk mode height will increase and decrease, so you can actually retract yourself or move yourself away from the terrain. Yeah.
Okay, one other option that's been added in version 16 is a linkage between the 2D and the 3D view. You can see there's a button here. If it's turned on, you'll be able to update both views at the same time by zooming in and out. I'm not going to show that here because it's really best seen in 2 screens, but it's just something new and exciting that's been added. Another option is for the GPS track. I'll just bring back the 3D view. So we've got options. If you are following an active GPS track, you can see it in the 3D view at this time. I'm going to go back to properties, and there's an option to turn it on and off right here. So as you're moving through the space in real time, the 3D view will update. at the same time.
Yeah, and with some aerial imagery on there, for instance, it gives you a very realistic tracking functionality to render not only with imagery but also with any other data sets that you have rendered in 3D. So that's a very exciting development in the 3D window. Those of you who have been following the development of this tool will notice that this dialog box, the properties dialog box, has got way more options, way more functions than it used to have. So, and as you can see, this is a major development priority for us in terms of where we're going in terms of the 3D environment. Thank you, Josie. I get to cover a lot of the kind of non-visible stuff now, some of the stuff that's kind of under the hood, things that do have an effect on how you use the software, but maybe you're not as initially visible. The number one enhancement that's noted on that What's New list is increased and improved processing capability using multi-cores. Things like contour generation, gridding, some of those processes which many of you may have used that maybe take a little bit longer. If you've got a multi-core processor, you can significantly improve that processing speed using the latest version of the software. You'll see dramatic increases in LiDAR processing, or, as I said, any of those CPU-intensive processes in the application. The other thing that's noteworthy, for those of you who have followed the Global Mapper story for a while, and we for many generations had talked about GEM as the kind of the cousin of Global Mapper, GEM being Global Energy Mapper. Well, Global Energy Mapper is no more. We no longer have that application. And what are the consequences for you as the user? Well, if you weren't a Global Energy Mapper before, you've got a lot of new tools now. We've added the functionality that was previously only available in that gem into the standard version of Global Mapper. I'll just show you a couple of examples. Right-click, insert pad site from library. This is essentially a templating tool. You can add a vector template. So if you're in the business of generating features of a particular type, a particular structure, a particular form, you can essentially create those once and then drop them at a defined location simply by clicking on the map or defining a X and Y center point of that feature. So makes the digitizing process a lot more straightforward. Previously, as I said, that was only in GEM. Now it's available for everyone. We've also got some advanced tools for volume calculation, for terrain flattening. Those are now part of the standard package as well. So again, those of you who went down the GEM path, obviously you're not losing anything, but the whole family is back together again. We've just got one application, Global Mapper. No more GEM. There are some scripting upgrades that I want to introduce you to. One that was requested a couple of times, which is now in there, is to calculate volumes using a script. Again, go back to the documentation for What's New, and you'll see a whole section on some of those other scripting enhancements. Those of you who are not familiar with scripting, have not tried scripting, we have a recording of last month's webinar on our website right now, which goes through that procedure. That, combined with the online scripting reference guide, will give you some indication as to what's available in scripting. If you're doing a lot of data processing, you may want to take a look at scripting as an option. But again, some new scripting functions have been added to Global Mapper 16 as well. This is one, again, that has been requested for many years. I'm going to listen for cheers in the background here. The ability to export a selected layer. When you select a layer in the Overlay Control Center, a new option now is to export just that layer. Now, the workflow that you would have to have followed previously is to isolate the layer that you wanted to export. If you had 20 shapefiles imported, for instance, but you just wanted to export one, the recommendation we would have provided would have been to uncheck the ones you don't want to export, run through the export procedure, and then check them all back on again. It's a little laborious. You don't have to do that anymore. Export selected layer, and you'll notice a layer is actually partly plural. You can actually export more than one layer. So a select group can be exported to file. So that, again, many years in the request box, finally made it into the application. Those of you using Geographic Calculator who are familiar with the GeoCalc mode, we have introduced a new toolbar for GeoCalc. I'm going to go to the View menu and enable that toolbar. GeoCalc toolbar is now a set of buttons. I just turn them on temporarily that allow you to enable and disable the GeoCalc mode. For those of you not familiar with that function, it basically allows you to utilize Blue Marble's extensive data source of coordinate transformation definitions and coordinate conversion definitions and datum transformations. All of those things that are part and parcel of the Geographic Calculator application can now be used within Global Mapper. Then we now have a toolbar that controls that. So we also have a direct trigger to open up Geographic Calculator if you want to do some conversions within that application. Again, this is something that's available if you have Blue Marble's Geographic Calculator application. That toolbar has been added. I'll go ahead and disable that one for today. Final thing I'm going to show you before I hand back over to Josie again is a very interesting tool. I'm going to actually unload my data. and bring up a couple of Windows Explorer windows. Now, we've added the ability for you to define a default projection within the application. In my folder here, I have a PRJ file. It's called startup.prj. I'm just going to open it up. Basically, this is UTM Zone 19, which is here in the northern hemisphere. Those who are familiar with UTM will be familiar with this coordinate reference system. If I want this to be my default when I open up Global Mapper or when I am generating a layer, I can take this projection file and simply copy it in one of two places. You can either put it in your user data folder, which is defined under the help menu, or you can simply put it in your program files. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to drag this into my Global Mapper 16 program files folder. It's right in here. And I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to begin the digitizing process. And you'll notice, actually, let me try that one more time. It basically will allow me to default to that projection. Apologies, I'm trying to resize my window here. Let's try that one more time. I may not have put it in the right place. We'll just check. So yeah, basically what that does is it defines a default projection for me. I apologize, I wasn't actually able to demonstrate that, but it defines a default projection. So every time I import a layer, every time I essentially create something with a digitizer, rather than defaulting to geographic lat long, it will default to whatever the projection definition is in that PRJ file. So again, a way to configure Global Mapper to a defined projection.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to go through some new formats and data for you here. As David talked about earlier, we've gotten user requests over the years, and one of those is for the Collada file type. So that's something that people asked about, and we've responded. So I'll just open that workspace. Okay, well, it's loading. So this will be familiar to people who know Collada. This is the 2D view, so there's not much to see, but what we've added is the ability for Global Mapper to view the textures that are applied to these models. And you can't manipulate them in Global Mapper, but they can be viewed. So I'll just go to the 3D. I'll add the ortho photo underneath. You can see there's a little more reference here, and now I'm going to go to the 3D viewer. And what you'll see, I'll just zoom back out, is the model that was held within the Collada format displayed in our 3D viewer.
Looks like it's in the middle of the ocean there.
It does. Let's go. Tropical sunny day. So this is when the skybox comes in handy. I think I've got my exaggeration up a little bit. I'm just going to take that back to 1.
I think you bent to 2 again.
Oh, okay. Number lock. All right. There we go. So that's more like it. And so this is brand new. One of the 3D options that we've been working on here. So another new file data source that we want to share with you is from the online data. And so we're introducing the Aster version 2 database. It's global elevation data, just over a 30-meter resolution. I'm going to bring in an example of one that we've added, or that we've imported already. Okay, while that's loading, and we'll go back to the 3D viewer.
So yeah, this is a really wonderful resource for those of you who, living in or working in some remote parts of the world, have access to a reasonably high resolution, consistent elevation data set. Again, as Josie mentioned, 30 meters, just over 30 meters, and hopefully this view is something you'll have seen before. This is the Rio de Janeiro area. You can see some of the iconic hills that surround the city here. So very, very cool new data set available.
It is. So to find that, you go to our online data sources, and I believe it's in Popular. Here it is for Aster version 2, and Terrain, and then Worldwide as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. And this is just, Josie just shared a couple of the new formats. Again, that document that I referred to has a list of some of the other file formats that have been added. Now, Josie, I'm going to keep some of the files that you have on screen right now because I want to show you probably one of the best new tools that we have at our disposal. I mentioned in my introductory bullets that we have a tool for generating fly-throughs. A fly-through basically is a video presentation, a video file that allows you to simulate, as the name implies, flying through the terrain or flying around a feature. I'm actually going to use both of the workspaces that Josie just had. I'm going to generate some fly-throughs, and you can see the results of that. Now, how do we work with fly-throughs, or how does a procedure work? Well, it's very, very simple. If you can use the digitizer in Global Mapper, you can develop a fly-through. You don't have to. If you have an existing line feature, if you've tracked your progress using a GPS receiver and you have that file, you can certainly use that file. You can import that file and use that. But I'm going to start from the very basics. Using my line tool, I'm simply going to draw a line through the terrain. Oops. Probably a straight line might be a little better. So we'll just skirt around some of the mountains here, and we'll go right past Copacabana Bay here. We'll just go out into the bay, and we'll come back around over the beach, and we'll land up at the bay. Now again, it's just a line feature. There's no special characteristics of this line. In fact, I'm just going to leave the default settings. I'm not going to apply any particular settings. Basically, I've traced the path that I want to record just using the digitizer tool. Now, the way that the procedure works is you simply select that line. I'm just using the digitizer, dragging a little box to ensure it's selected, and you will notice right in the middle of the digitizer toolbar a brand new button, Edit Fly-Through Path. So I want to pop that window open right now. What you're seeing here at the top is a list of all of the shape points or vertices that I just created when I generated that line. And currently, all they have is an X and a Y value. In my case, it's a latitude and longitude value. You'll also notice columns available for the Z value, time, heading, and if I scroll across, that's also pitch. Essentially, this allows me to prepare the fly-through parameters. The camera mode can be one of three types. A straight-ahead view, which is what I'm going to do in this case. We want to kind of follow the path, looking straight ahead. We can also perform a fixed direction fly-through. In other words, we can look at a particular bearing as we fly. It doesn't have to be straight ahead. It can be on a defined bearing, or we can look at a fixed point. I'm going to get to this one in a little bit, where the fixed point allows you to define a point, and it will rotate or move around that one point. Towards the bottom of the window, we've got some options in terms of where we're going to be placed or simulated. Relative to ground, I think I plugged in 100 meters last time I was doing this. It's remembered that, so I want to keep that elevation. So I will be 100 meters above ground level. The duration allows me to define how long it's going to take to get from the start to the end. I want to shorten this slightly so we can speed up the fly-through. Let's go with 25 seconds. When I have finished setting all these parameters, I simply click the Generate Fly-Through Data button, and you'll notice the table at the top of the screen is now populated with those values. My Z value now reflects 100 meters above the local terrain. The time obviously accumulates as I go through to a 25-second finale. The headings derive from the different vertices. And as you'll see, it's not an angular transition. It does smoothly transition from between each vertex. So that heading would be at that vertex, and it will gradually show us the heading at the next vertex. And pitch in this case is going to be straight ahead. We can adjust pitch with some of the other parameters as well, but we'll just leave that at 0 for the time being. Now, the other thing we can do here is actually edit any of these individually. So if I want to begin my fly-through from a higher elevation, maybe swooping down over the beach, I can manually override what Global Mapper has given me as far as the Z value is concerned, and again, start from a high perspective, low perspective. So this is entirely customizable. I'm just going to go with these defaults for now. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to bring up our 3D window. The 3D window is going to allow us, obviously, to see our terrain, this example of the Aster data that Josie had introduced us to, and it will allow us then to play back that 3D view, and ultimately, when we're happy with the results, we can record that. Now, there's a couple of new buttons in the toolbar here. Josie introduced you to some of the other new features in the 3D view. We now have buttons that allow us to preview the fly-through, to actually simulate the playback, to cancel it, which is the last one, and to record that, to save it out as a file. We're not going to do that today in the interest of time, but you can basically save what we're going to preview in the application as an AVI file, which can be played back in most movie players or most video players. Let's take a look at the first button first. Let's look at the preview fly through. Now what we're seeing here is my first vertex, my first point. This is number 1 on the path. I can go to the next one, and again, point by point I can preview what the view would be like. If I need to change the elevation, if I need to change any of the parameters, I can click the Edit Frame button, and again I have options to change some of those variables that I would have established in the initial view. So you do have the editing capability right in this window as well. When we're happy with those results, if you want to go through and preview each frame, you can do that. When we're happy, we simply click the render, and what you're going to see, hopefully it's coming through smoothly on the web version. I know there's sometimes bandwidth issues, but I'm now flying over the terrain, following the path that I had drawn, hopefully going over the mountains, and you can see the iconic mountains in the Rio de Janeiro area, going around the headland, and Copacabana Beach. So very simple, just to simply draw the line and have Global Mapper essentially follow that line and hopefully terminate here at the bay. And if I'm happy with the results, as I said before, I simply hit the save button and it allows me to save that fly through. Resolution can be defined right up to 720 and 1080p. So you can generate very, very high quality, high resolution fly through models. And again, those are just videos, can be played in any video player. So I'll actually cancel that for the time being. So that is just one example of a fly-through. I'm going to unload the data, and I'm going to load up the workspace that Josie had previously, which was Salisbury Cathedral, right down in Wiltshire in the south of England. Again, we'll put on the background imagery to give it a little perspective. I'm going to generate a different type of fly-through in this case. So we're obviously focusing very much on this Collada model, this model of the cathedral. It could be a job site that you're working on. It could be a project site. It could be some digitizing you've done. You want to visualize that as a 3D model. A great way of doing that is to first of all, create a circular feature. And for those of you who are not too familiar with the digitizer and Global Mapper, simply right-click. It is a line feature, and we're going to create a circular or elliptical line. And I'm going to begin the line by clicking somewhere close to the center of the cathedral, dragging my cursor, and we'll pull it out to approximately this location. So again, all we've done here is generate a circle line. I could have manually drawn the line as well, but this obviously makes it a little cleaner. Again, the parameters of the line are not important. I simply select it using the same function I did before. I'm going to edit my fly-through path. In this case, I'm going to use a fixed point. Rather than flying in a straight line looking straight ahead, I'm going to use my fixed point. And I don't know what the X and Y are off the top of my head, but I have this handy Select from Map button. And I simply click approximately at the center of the cathedral once again, and that becomes the focus of the camera. So regardless of which direction I'm looking, or I'm traveling, it will always look at that location. Again, we can adjust the elevation, and the duration will just leave. I'll bring this down a little bit, probably to 50 meters. We'll see what the results of this look like. Generate our fly-through data, and we'll click OK. And once again, in our 3D view, we'll pop up that 3D window. It will show us the Salisbury Cathedral, and we can preview the fly-through. And again, hands off here, it's just rotating, following my circle at a standard elevation. I could have, if I wanted to be creative, increased or decreased the elevation at various points along my path to kind of give you that more artistic effect, but just circulating around, looking at that feature. So very, very simple to create fly-through models, very effective, and again, the ability to export these as an AVI file allows you to distribute this and share the details of your project or whatever it is you're doing in Global Mapper with other users. So, getting dizzy, Josie?
Yeah, that's a good length. So that means that any user, even if they don't have Global Mapper, they could still view the fly-through.
Absolutely, yeah. The fly-throughs are exported in an AVI file, and we'll have other video formats added to that list. But yeah, absolutely, it's a tremendous way to visualize. Josie and I in Germany had a large video screen behind the booth, and we got a lot of people stopping and watching some of our fly-throughs that we created. Mm-hmm. We just created them on the fly and allowed people to fly through. It was a lot of fun. Excellent. Okay, well, I think at this stage, what I'd like to do is kind of engage you folks a little bit. You've been watching too much. It's time for you to participate. We have a poll that we're going to enable, and I am going to ask you a question. You're going to have a number of answers that you can choose from. Basically, what we want to know from you who are attending is which version of Global Mapper you are currently using. You should see on the screen you have options, version 16, version 15, 14, Some of you are using older versions, and then I'm sure there are some of you out there that are currently not using Global Mapper. I'm also going to use this opportunity to recommend that if you are currently on 15, the upgrade to 16 is available at a very deep discount. It's certainly a very affordable transition. And again, with some of the new tools we've been added, certainly there's value in that upgrade. But if you're one of the, looking at about just over 40% that are using version 15, you may want to at least download 16. Take a look, request that temporary license, and if it's something you need, then again, very affordable upgrade for you. Just another couple of seconds, we'll close that poll, and we will turn around and share the results with you. 3, 2, 1. And we'll go ahead and close. And let's go ahead and we'll hit that share button. And hopefully on your screen you're seeing the results of that poll. So again, about a quarter, just under a quarter of you have actually gone and upgraded to 16 already. Quite a few of you are still in 15. Hopefully this will give you enough of a reason to take a look at 16. And some of you working on older versions. Obviously there's tools that we've been introducing you to, and tools we've been using are not going to be available in your version. So again, great opportunity to download a trial version of 16. And especially to those at the bottom there, the 11% who are not using Global Mapper, hopefully you're getting ideas to some of the functionality we have available. So thank you for participating in our poll.
Great. Okay, we are going to talk about the LiDAR module now, and most likely for the rest of the session today. So I'm just going to show you how to activate it. If you, just like David said, if you haven't tried 16, you can request a evaluation license. You can also request an evaluation license for the LiDAR module. So once you have 16 downloaded, go to the Help menu and Module Extension License Manager, and you can tick the box next to LiDAR. I won't do it now, and then click Register, and in that registration screen you can request an evaluation license. So I'll just cancel out of here, and because I already have LiDAR registered, I can turn on the toolbar. Here we go, and you can see I have a new toolbar at the top. So I'm going to load some data, and we'll just wait a second while it comes in. One thing we're going to talk about today, or I'm going to talk about now, is ground classification. So this is the ability to automatically classify ground points. And this was available before, but it's been sped up with the processing improvements that David talked about earlier, and we have the ability to define more parameters. So in the LiDAR toolbar, I'm going to the Auto Classify Ground Points button. I'm going to click that, and you'll see you've got more options here for the bin size can change from meters to point spacing. Minimum height departure from local mean can be adjusted.
Yeah, and this the intention of this is to basically provide value that's not currently in your LiDAR point cloud. If you have a lot of unclassified points, or if the data that you're working with is entirely unclassified, this allows you to identify which of the points in that point cloud are likely to be ground points, and you can do that with a very high level of confidence. So any ground model you generate, any surface model, you can be confident that it actually does accurately represent the terrain. So.
Great. Thanks, David. So we'll just go with the default options here and click OK. Well, before I do that, I just want to take notice of this area here. We've got the gray is unclassified, and the brown is the ground classification. So just watch that area. Did you have anything else?
No, I think that's it. I think this is probably the best illustration. It's hard sometimes to see the results of this. First of all, it is worth mentioning that Josie has visualized this data based on classification. So there's really only two colors present: ground, which is brown, and unclassified, which is everything else, which is gray. And you can see trees and there's buildings. And we're going to be playing a little bit more with this type of data in a minute. But hopefully if the drum roll starts here and Josie hits that button, we're going to see some really improved data.
Okay, here I go. And it's thinking, going through all the points, and you can see a drastic change here with the amount of brown points. And I'm just going to zoom in to show that.
So yeah, what was previously unclassified is now useful data, something you can actually use in a ground modeling application, and you know the resolution of any subsequent ground model is going to be higher because you've pulled in those unclassified points. And again, this process could have began could have begun with data which was entirely unclassified, and using the algorithms that Mike has developed, you can actually identify, just based on patterns within the data, which of those are likely to be ground points. I have to stress, it's not a perfect science. There are still going to be issues, but as you'll see, we do have manual tools to override some of the strange anomalies that may occur with your data. But that tool by itself is an extremely valuable one, automatic detection of ground points. I am going to move on from that and go somewhere else. I'm actually going to go down the road from where we are right now to Portland and bring in another point cloud. This is a new tool for 16. Once again, we have a situation here where we have a raw point cloud that has only 2 classifications. And now we're not showing the legend here, but again, it's brown is my ground points, and everything else is gray. Basically, those gray points are unclassified. In the LiDAR toolbar, there's another auto-classify function. This auto-classifies non-ground points. I'm not going to go into the details of the advanced math that's under the hood here, but basically what it does is it recognizes, again, those patterns. If a point is part of a flattened plane that's elevated from the surrounding ground, we're going to make an assumption it's a building. Is that a perfect science? No, it's not. There are going to be situations where it may not give us the results we expect. But again, it's a starting point for generating and for being able to differentiate what's a building from what's a tree, from what's at the ground. So this tool is an automatic classification tool. I'm going to go to the default settings here again, and hopefully as a result of this process, you will see a distinct change in some of the colors on the map in the background. Again, it's going through and looking at the existing ground points, comparing some of those non-ground points, and you will see 2 additional colors have now been added to the map. You'll see these orange colors, and if I were to bring up the legend, those would be buildings, and my green colors would be vegetation. And you can see it does a very good job of identifying where there are buildings. It looks like a large warehouse of some sort here, some other building structures. Now, it's not a perfect science. It is worth noting that there are some little holes in the data here, and you may find if it's a roof structure that's not uniform, Global Mapper may not accurately reflect that as being a building. Remember, we always have tools for doing some manual override of those anomalies. The easiest way, especially if you're dealing with buildings, is to use our profiling tool. And the profiling tool, which is not new, but it's something that's becoming increasingly relevant as we get into working with some of these 3D data sets, allows you to visualize a point cloud from a lateral perspective. The profile tool right here on the toolbar where my cursor is located, you can activate it and essentially draw a line that creates a cross-sectional view. One of the things that we've added for version 16 is to actually define the width of the swath. In other words, rather than being along a single linear path, the points that are going to be rendered cover a buffer, if you like, of that line. And you can define what that buffer is before you create the line. So right now it's at 25 meters. I'm just going to change that to 30. And now when I create my line, you can see that's a 30-meter swath going right through this building. All I did is left-click, right-click, and I see those points, and this actually is a dome structure. I happen to know where it is. But you can see that a lot of these points are not accurately classified. Within this window, I can simply drag a box around those and universally change their classification, override what was missed during the process. There's a button here to automatically classify these as buildings. Simply click that, we'll click yes, and hopefully we get a more consistent orange coverage for that particular building. So the combination of automatic classification and manual classification within Global Mapper gives you the ability, again, to take raw point cloud data or unclassified point cloud data and generate something that's extremely useful, which in our case, as you can see, is the outline of these buildings, which gives us a perfect stepping stone into what Josie's about to show you next.
Okay. Well, now that we have the classification for buildings and vegetation, we can look at turning those into vector features. So we can use the LiDAR toolbar again to extract vector features with the tool here. I'm just going to go through and click that. And you can see the options here: building outline extraction, extract 3D building outlines, and I'm just going to go with the defaults. And then tree extraction. Right now, you can extract a point for each tree, and we're going to go through this process.
And I should say at this stage, we're also working on a tool where these trees will actually be modeled in 3D. Right now, as Josie mentioned, they're going to be points. Still extremely useful what we've been able to do here, but they will eventually be essentially 3-dimensional models of these trees as well.
Okay, I'm going to click OK.
And as part of this process, there are going to be a couple of new layers created. One, the building outlines, and the other, the trees. So.
Okay, and I'll just turn off the LiDAR so we can see the features. I'm going to select the info tool, and you can see there is a point representing each tree, and the point style is the tree itself. So using the info tool on that selected tree, we can get the elevation, height, and then the average spread and max spread.
Yeah, we introduced this tool to the forestry department up in the University of Maine, just up the road from us here, just last week. And we were talking about all sorts of possibilities in terms of being able to calculate the potential lumber output from a forested area by being able to define each tree individually, looking at the spread and applying some calculations. You could determine how much usable wood can be extracted from a forested area. So that's just one application where this tool, starting from a raw point cloud, gives you some very, very useful data.
Okay, so now let's look at the 3D vector building features in the 3D viewer. So I'm just going to turn that on now, and you can see what we've created based on the classified points.
Yeah, and adjusting some of those settings a little bit will clean up some of the angles. We just went with those default settings, but the ability to essentially define a rectangular building is something that we're certainly going to be looking at.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
I think that's it for.
There are a couple of other LiDAR module functions I'm going to introduce. Let's go ahead and turn the point cloud on again. I know we're quickly running out of time here. Couple of new tools in the LiDAR module as well for doing filtering either during export, during gridding, or just based on selection. And this is something, again, has been requested for a while. I'm just going to draw a rectangular feature here in my LiDAR point cloud. Again, I'm not too concerned about the actual characteristics of that. I'm going to select that. The easiest way for me to select a feature in a layer is to right-click on the layer itself and then select all. Now, you can see barely through the point cloud that feature is highlighted, indicating it has been selected. I'm going to select all of the LiDAR points within that area. Now, this is obviously just a very manual selection process, but under the right-click, select advanced select options, we'll go select all points within the selected area. And they're difficult to see the results because they're all highlighted, all enclosed in a little box, but I have a selection of LiDAR points. Now, with those selected, I can apply a filter. And the filtering options are also available in this advanced selection options. So we can filter selected LiDAR points by a number of variables: elevation, color, class, as you'll see. I'll go ahead and bring up the dialog box and you'll see some of the options in here. Again, this was based on an arbitrarily created rectangular feature. You may define the extent of what's going to be filtered based on some sort of recognized jurisdictional boundary or some more recognized feature. In this case, again, it's just an arbitrary area. But you'll see some of the filtering options we now have available. Elevation. We can limit the visibility or the points within a certain elevation range, within certain classification, and colors, if we want to define them based on some of the inherent RGB values that are in there. So a number of different filtering options. This same dialog box is going to be available when you export or when you create a grid, when you create a surface model. Again, you can define what it is you want to grid by filtering the data during that gridding process or as part of that gridding process. So this idea of being able to filter the data during multiple components or multiple processes within your LiDAR data, it has been added and is new for 16. We have the option, speaking of gridding, I'm not going to do this in the interest of time. I'm going to show you another tool that's available. Speaking of gridding, under our analysis menu for when we create our elevation grid, we'll go ahead and just isolate just the underlying LiDAR data. But we have the option to grid not based on elevation values, which would be what I think most people would probably be most interested in. You're generating something based on absolute elevation. But we can generate a grid based on height above ground. Now, this is great for doing things like tree modeling or building modeling. So just with a raw point cloud, again, identifying those ground points is step one. Then it will generate a model that shows you heights above ground as part of your raster model, as opposed to what would be normal, which would be standard elevation. You'll notice also in here we can grid by intensity value as well. So those are just a couple of additional options that have been added. For those of you who have not used the LiDAR module, the grid method gives you some more options as well. This is something that's not new for 16, but it is something that requires that LiDAR module. Normal gridding was a triangulation process, but with the LiDAR module you can apply binning either based on minimum, average, or maximum value within a defined area, within a defined bin size, and that gives you option to do DTM, digital terrain modeling, or digital surface modeling if you need to do that. So those are just some of the additional gridding options that are available. Quite a lot of new data visualization options. In this point cloud, we've been visualizing based on classification. The LiDAR toolbar does give you the option to change, and you'll notice a couple of new ones in here. Height above ground is a fairly new one. You can see this now reflects the actual height above the ground points, so you can see the height of buildings, heights of trees. And one of my favorites, which has just been added, which is the LiDAR by return height delta. Now, what this means basically is the difference in height between the multi-returns from a single pulse. If you have more than one return from a LiDAR pulse, it's typically an indication that the initial surface was something that could be penetrated by that pulse. So it typically is going to be vegetation or a leaf. Now, where that first return, where the height of that first return and the height of the last return is a good indication of where the height of vegetation. So if we generate our visualization based on that, you'll see my elevation legend over here on the left side now reflects a very finite range from 0 to about 4 meters. And you can see the red areas in this case indicating, we're assuming, where the trees are. You can see the forested area down here, and you can see some of the scattered trees within this residential neighborhood. And again, an initial visual indication as to the height of those trees. So those are just a couple of the additional tools that are available in the LiDAR module. There are a lot more, as I mentioned before. I do recommend consulting with the documentation that's available when you install the software to see some of the other tools that are available. So, and that, I believe, is all we have time for today. It looks like we're getting towards the top of the hour. We want to reiterate that what we were able to do today, what we wanted to share with you today, was basically the highlights of Global Mapper 16. Hopefully we gave you enough information to at least go further and download a copy yourself. You can go to our website, bluemarblegeo.com, go to Global Mapper, and you can download the latest version, activate it as for a trial. And if you have any questions during that trial process, you'll notice a couple of contact opportunities you have. Our GeoHelp is our technical support inbox internally, and also the forum is a fantastic place for asking questions or for browsing through some of the other issues. So.
Great. So hopefully our support team was able to answer your questions that you had today. If not, we'll follow up with you directly as soon as we can. And just keep an eye out for your the next month's webinar in your inbox.
Yeah, next month, as I said before, it's going to be a challenging one. We've been asked many times about the use of GPS with Global Mapper. Certainly something we want to make sure people are aware of. Logistically, it's going to be challenging for us to present this through a web kind of environment, but we'll do our best. We're going to devise some scenarios and go through some simulations as to how you can use Global Mapper with GPS. And there are many ways, by the way. It's not just the tracking process, but there are many ways that Global Mapper can interact with a GPS. So we're looking forward to developing that one, sharing that one with you next month, and I believe that email invitation is going out within the next couple of days.
And this webinar will be posted in the next couple of days as well. And just be sure to look to our website for any previous webinars that have been recorded. And you might find some helpful information there.
Great, and thank you for your help today, Josie.
You're welcome. Thanks,
and
David.
Thank you all for attending.